The issues of sexuality and gender reassignment have become hot topics recently, even in primary schools. Some are very keen on pushing radical trans ideology on very young children, while others are resistant, especially as those most keen on the agenda seem to be the genuine extremists who are enthusiastic in indoctrinating malleable youth. In Florida, Ron DeSantis has decreed that such topics are not suitable for 5-year-olds. That's provoked outrage on the far left. It seems an eminently reasonable position to me, though I must admit to not being an expert. So it's perhaps advisable to consult people who are experts, or who at least advertise themselves as such. Michel Foucault, one of the titanic theorists in queer studies, sexuality and gender, advocated for the abolition of all age of consent laws right down to infancy. Gail Rubin, a prominent activist and theorist on sex and gender politics, wrote that like communists and homosexuals in the 1960s, boy lovers today are so stigmatised that it's difficult to find defenders of their civil liberties, let alone for their erotic orientation. This defence of paedophilia was written in Thinking Sex, the founding document of queer theory. She also compared paedophilia to a preference for spicy food. Patrick Califia is a bisexual trans man who was a lesbian prior to transitioning. He's another pivotal author on sexuality, transitioning and gender identity. And he wrote, "Any child old enough to decide whether or not he or she wants to eat spinach, play with trucks or wear shoes is old enough to decide whether or not she wants to run around naked in the sun, masturbate, sit in someone's lap, or engage in sexual activity with adults." Califia also said that paedophiles should be more and not less invested in children's lives. Judith Butler is the most prominent theorist today in queer and trans studies. And she said, "When incest is a violation, we reject occasions when it is not." Why would I talk that way? Well, I think there are probably forms of incest that are not necessarily traumatic and only gain their traumatic character as a consequence of the social stain they produce. In fact, not a single queer theorist has spoken out strongly against paedophilia, because the entire theology is based on transgressing social norms. When Professor Derek Jensen related these facts recently to a room full of radical students, he was screamed down with claims of homophobia, transphobe, and fascist. Because how dare anyone criticise paedophilia? One of the students repeatedly yelled out, "We see you," as if he was the problem, and not all the people advocating for the statutory rape of infants. But for the real expert in gender studies, we should turn to the father of the whole discipline, Dr. John Money. Money was born in New Zealand in 1921 and was one of the first people to publish theories on how gender is influenced by social constructs. It was he who coined the terms gender identity, gender role, and sexual orientation. He was also the first to endorse conversion therapy for very young children, the same issue causing such division today. Money, who primarily worked in America, received about 65 honours, awards and degrees during his lifetime. In the early 1960s, he published a number of papers which described attempts at conversion therapy on various children. The papers' titles, "Non-Genital Manifestations in Prepubertal Boys" and "Effeminacy in Prepubertal Boys," give some idea of his inclinations. In 1965, he established the John Hopkins Identity Clinic, and the hospital began performing sexual reassignment surgery the next year. Money was lauded for his entire career, but he was quite open about recommending sexual relationships between 10-year-old boys and men in their 30s, believing such unions to be expressions of real love and not remotely pathological. His ideology was based around the idea that gender is learned rather than innate. But all his theories were fundamentally flawed, and his most famous case is an example of shocking abuse. When a botched circumcision in 1966 left Bruce Reiner without a penis, Money persuaded the boy's parents that sex reassignment surgery would be in his best interests. His only real interest, of course, was in himself, in grasping the opportunity to road test his theories. Reiner's testicles were removed, he was renamed Brenda, and raised as a girl, and Money published a number of papers which claimed the reassignment was a complete success. Reiner had a twin brother, Brian, and Money even forced the boys to have sex with each other, taking photographs of these couplings for research. Money used the proclaimed success of this experiment to advertise the idea of gender reassignment for other vulnerable children. But it was a catastrophic failure. By the age of 14, Brenda Reiner was a psychological mess. His parents told him the truth, and he reconverted to a boy, calling himself David. His brother, Brian, who was driven to schizophrenia by the experience. He suffered years of depression and took his own life by overdosing on antidepressants. David never adjusted and committed suicide by blowing his own head off with a shotgun. The boys' parents blamed Money for the death of both their sons. Brenda had never identified as a girl. He was bullied by his peers who called him Cave Woman, and he always felt uncomfortable, despite all the frilly dresses and being pumped full of female hormones. Yet these practices rolled out by Money are enjoying a renaissance. And if such individuals are even remotely representative of today's radicals, then I'm with Ron DeSantis all the way. If you'd like to support this channel, please like, subscribe, and think about buying my books. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they're available on the links below. Please do feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.